felt like the most important thing I did. My mother would take me grocery shopping on Saturday mornings, and I would watch what people put in their carts, and then imagine them sitting in front of a TV with microwave frozen food, or throwing a dinner party with lasagna, salad, and breadsticks. It was an unusual way to put the world together, turning observations into fantasies, but it led me to deeper truths. Sure, sometimes I would daydream through tests, or getting to school on time, or basketball games I was playing in. But for the most part, it led me to excel in school. I could look at problems in creative ways and see solutions where others hadn't. Teachers liked this. They said I thought outside the box. But daydreaming took a turn when I was a teenager. My family moved when I was 13. My father became a minister at a megachurch. Suddenly, a lot of people expected me to seem good and likable. I struggled wanting to spend time in my head rather than impress other people. And my grades dropped from A's to C's and D's. Thinking outside the box was less useful for geometry problems and memorizing Civil War battles. In fact, when expected to think inside the box, I regularly found I would get bored and lose focus. So then daydreaming became an escape. I was free to imagine that one day I would be away from all this, if I could bring my grades up, landing at some leafy New England college where I could live a life of the mind. But the more time I spent in my head, the further out of reach real life felt. I couldn't stop daydreaming. Those dreams of colleges were dashed when I daydreamed through the ACT. And sure, there are worse fates than undergrad at state school because Hoosiers, right guys? But there was a deeper problem here. The daydreaming had come to feel like a noise I couldn't turn off. It would start off at a low volume. Observations, ideas, hopes, ambience. But then it would get louder, over me writing paper, or listening to my boss, or driving. It drowned out whatever I wanted to do. And if I sat down and tried to create something with it, the noise just turned itself up, over my creativity, one daydream following another into a distracted stream of thoughts. I tried the things you're supposed to try. Therapists who diagnosed it as depression and anxiety. It was true that I never seemed to feel happy, and I lived in fear of what the noise would drown out next. I liked the idea that it was depression, because depression was still taboo in the mid-2000s in Indiana, and I associated with messy, wild artists, Sylvia Plath and Kurt Cobain. I tried antidepressants, though when doctors asked whether they were working, I would think, I don't know. But I was afraid to say so, because if they weren't, I was lost. Then my sophomore year of college, I found something that did quiet the noise, quite effectively. My first experience with it was Smirnoff Green Apple and Sprite. Drunk 10 minutes later, I felt like a kid again. The fear of missing something important went silent. After college brought even more drinking, and new hobbies, one-night stands with people I just met, binge eating, followed by over-exercising, bulimia, diet pills. When all this behavior was causing chaos, I didn't have to deal with how daydreaming would take over before I could finish cover letters to get myself out of dead-end jobs, or my inability to follow my own plot when I sat down to write stories, or the relationships that ended when men said I was too aloof. I did continue to try therapy, off and on for 20 years. It had helped me become more assertive and communicate better. But when I tried to talk through the noise, nothing helped. Then last year, I once again found myself overwhelmed at an entry-level job. I signed up with a new therapist, just hoping to learn skills for stress management. Instead, at our first session, he looked down my mental health history, and he surprised me when he picked out a 20-year-old diagnosis that I had only briefly treated and barely thought about since. He said, "You have ADHD." No, I said. No, he did not have this condition suddenly trendy on TikTok. Only one doctor ever said I had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and my therapist afterward had gotten to the real problem. Depression, right? Because I was a depressed artist. But this therapist went on to describe a condition that sounded exactly like me. ADHD, he said, is a mostly genetic deficiency of dopamine, a neurotransmitter responsible for motivation and pleasure. Your brain needs it to focus. Not having it causes hyperactivity and impulsive behavior, substance abuse, binge eating, one-night stands, as the brain's last-ditch efforts to drive up the chemical it needs. It's especially common for it to be misdiagnosed in girls, he said, in whom it often manifests as excessive daydreaming. This was shocking to me. I spent my whole life thinking that what was wrong with me was complicated and unsolvable. I have to say I didn't immediately take to it. The boy in my Sunday school class who used to run across the folding chairs had ADHD. Yeah, I had trouble paying attention, but that was the depression, the treatment-resistant depression that nothing had worked for in 2.5 decades. The therapist continued explaining. The first-line treatment for ADHD is actually stimulants, he said. Drugs like Adderall and Vyvanse, which are believed to work by increasing dopamine in the brain. So I made an appointment with a psychiatrist. She prescribed me Adderall. I remember my first dose hitting while I was in the shower after a cycle in the class. Before, the shower had been a vortex of daydreaming. Alone, without my watch on, I had been like a Vegas gambler with no sense of time and nothing to stop me. Until I was running extremely late, which I usually was. But now I felt aware of time and in control. A calm washed over me, and I felt pleasure at the hot water and the smell of the shampoo. I was capable of pleasure. As I drove back to my neighborhood, the disorder in my head organized into an ability to parallel park my car straight. And creative ideas began batting around not as a distraction, but as something I wanted to and believed I could follow through on. I sat down to breakfast, and when I realized I hadn't burned it, I started to cry. Because I thought I was someone who burns breakfast. A hot mess, a depressed artist. But maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was just an artist. Someone who follows through and creates art, who has ADHD. The weeks that followed, newly medicated, I didn't feel the need to self-destruct. I felt fine eating healthy meals and having one drink. And I enjoyed talking to people, now that I could follow what they were saying, and writing, now that I didn't lose my train of thought. Daydreaming came no longer to feel like noise. Instead, it became source material, the place where I could begin to solve problems and create the world I wanted, now that I had the focus to follow through. Finally, again, daydreaming could be the most important thing I do.